Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Ishitella. My name is Akilia Nai, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. These studies are so important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, Chairman Omali Ishitella continues reading from his book, Vanguard-The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, Chapter 10, The Question of the Nation, picking up on page 343 with the section, African Petty Bourgeoisie Attacks Garvey. Following the study, we will open it up for our live viewers to ask questions of our chairman, and it is my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, our chairman, Omali Ishitella. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru. Thank you very much, comrade. I want to welcome all of the members of the party, Uhuru movement, and others who have come to participate in this study. I want to remind everybody that there is, shortly after this study, a conference of the Black is Back Coalition that I will be attending, and I'm hoping that those of you who are participating in this study will also be attending. That starts at 10 Eastern Time. And you can get there and find out more by going to blackisbackcoalition.org. I also want to say that on today, I'm going to start a little closer to page 340. I'm going to start on page 340. I know we stopped off at maybe, I think, 342, 343. But I want to start there because I think the line of thought, it's important to establish the line of thought going into the following pages. And then finally, I want to say that we'll be ending the reading early so that I can open it up for questioning. I'm going to try to use just about half the time of this study for you to be able to ask questions. And you may want to ask questions specific to this chapter, to the reading, or you may want to ask any other kind of question, and I want to give you an opportunity to do that. And brothers and sisters, comrades, it's important for me to also say that this is not an exercise in simply sharing some kind of abstract readings or abstract concepts. It is part of a revolutionary struggle that we engaged in that's really important at this time. It's always important, but now when there's so many people who are in motion in various ways, there's so much spontaneous activity. Our struggle in the African People's Socialist Party is to help everybody understands that we're gonna have to have a revolution, that there is no way that this system can be reformed to freedom. And that's not to say that there won't be instances and shouldn't be instances where we will fight for certain kinds of reforms, but the reforms can't be an end unto themselves. And nor can we have a movement that is guided by spontaneity. Spontaneity and spontaneous struggles will occur. And in many instances, it's going to be very good that they occur. But spontaneity, a protest in and of itself will not lead to our freedom. And that's what this is about. It's not the exhilaration that people can experience through clever and exciting spontaneous activities, but the question that's always before us is to what end? And the end has to be the suffering of our people and the suffering of the peoples of the world. In order to make that happen, there has to be revolutionary theory. So you can have theory without revolution, but you cannot have revolution without theory. And you have to have a philosophy. You have to have something that explains to us our place and our destiny in the world. And so that's why we are taking this time, because this issue, this question of theory, the question of philosophy, is something that has been left in the hands of the petty bourgeoisie, the African middle class, the learned section, the talented 10th, as Du Bois and the NAACP would have put it. And what we're saying is that the African working class internationally has to assume responsibility for making this revolution, because we are the only one who can take it to its conclusion. And not only are we saying that the African working class must do that, but beyond that, the working class has to have a possession of its own instrument for making that happen. And that's what the African People's Socialist Party is. In fact, we are not the working class as such. We are its advanced detachment. We are the vanguard. This is the kind of party organization that we have. We are the general staff. That is to say that we're talking about an organization that's comprised of professional revolutionaries. No matter what our occupation may be, our profession is revolution, overturn a social system. And so we practice, we study, we do everything that's necessary to make that happen. And we understand that the working class has to assume responsibility for becoming the ruling class. And that means that we have to, and have been in the process of developing our own theory, which is extremely important, because otherwise what we always end up doing is borrowing the theory of our oppressors, because that's mostly what's available to us in terms of information and books and other means. So African internationalism is our philosophy, and it's absolutely necessary to have a philosophy. Because that's the thing that tethers us to a conclusion, to a future. This thing that allows us to have the long view. And it's only because we have the long view that we can avoid being dominated by spontaneity, and we can avoid becoming opportunists. If you don't have the long view, then whatever is happening at the moment can take possession of what it is that we do and how we see the world. And that's what opportunism is, sacrificing the long-term interests of the working class. And in this instance, when we say the working class, we mean the African nation itself, because we're talking about a proletarian nation for the most part. We're talking about sacrificing the long-term interests of the working class for the interests of the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie. That's what opportunism is. And if you don't have the long view, if you don't have a long view, then everything is your strategy. Everything you're doing is strategical, as opposed to it being tactics that might facilitate a strategic objective that you're looking for. So I'm going to start on page 340, and I'm going to be as expeditious as I can, and which means that's going to be problematic, I know, in some ways, because as you know, I know it can be extraordinarily boring just to have somebody reading at you. But I want to do that, and I want to end it with enough time so that whatever kinds of issues and questions, some might be specific to the text itself, some might be other things that you feel like you might need to ask or talk about, and that's going to be okay too, generally speaking. And but if there's something specific to the text and you have it before you, it might be helpful if you can identify the page number and what have you. I'm working from Vanguard. This Vanguard, the chapter that we have on the question of the nation, is something, this is from the 7th Congress. The 6th Congress is where we first put that forward. And we've simply transplanted from the 6th Congress document, the uneasy equilibrium, to this document that was the political report to the 7th Congress. So I'm working from this document from the 7th Congress, partially because you need to get this book as well, because there's a lot of other important stuff in here. So I'm on page 340. And we're talking about the nation. And this is something that does not really get good discussion within the African world, and much of the world for that matter. There was a time where this was an issue that was struggled around, and people had to, people were engaged in struggling to define the nation. Even in the African community, that was the case at one juncture. Who the hell are you? And that's a strange thing for people to be having to grapple with. Who are you? You know, because we've been all kinds of things since we've been named by white power and white people under colonialism. And the process of our development has been locked into colonial domination. So how Africa has unfolded, where we've been living as peoples, how we've been dispersed around the world, all of that has affected our consciousness of who we are as a people. And this question of nation and nationality is essential to that. And going into this study, we quoted Victor Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor under the administration of James Earl Carter, who president, and who was an advisor to the Obama regime, and how he was talking about this era that the world has entered, where the era of empire is over, and that the question of identity has become extremely critical for peoples everywhere who now see this struggle for identity as being part of the struggle against imperialism with the growing consciousness of masses of people. And he's absolutely correct. That's what we started looking at. So we're saying that we want to deal with this question of nation, not just as some kind of idle plaything that we want to engage in, because even the bourgeoisie, or the thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie, have come to understand that this is a critical question at this time, because much of what has been constructed on the foundation of the colonial oppression, enslavement of masses, the people of the world, which gave identity to Europe and Europeans, the sense of sameness that is part of the subjective content of national identity, much of that is under assault and under and we see some of the material manifestations or objective factors relating to the definition of nation also under assault by the struggles and resistance of the people. We hopefully will clarify some of this that has not been clarified up to now. So I'm on page 340. So we say, like the European nation, the emergent African nation is a response to necessity. We are facing the historical requirements for advancing, developing, we are facing the historical requirements for advancing and developing Africa and African people, whose generally oppressive conditions of existence derive from the stuff resulting in the emergence of the European or so-called white bourgeoisie or capitalist nation. One people, one party, one destiny. This was the political report to our 5th Congress. Address this necessity. It raises the issue of the consolidation of the African nation as a practical political problem that we must solve to forward the national liberation of our people from imperialist domination worldwide. African internationalism is a theory of practice, as exemplified by this passage from One People, One Party, One Destiny, and I quote, "An African internationalist investigation leads us to conclude, among other things, that key to the liberation of African people is the defeat of the parasitic stranglehold that has been imposed on us by imperialism. The African working class has to be informed by a scientific worldview. And that's part of what it is that we do with these studies. One of the reasons these studies are so important to us is to arm the advanced detachment, so that to create actual working class intellectuals, because the assumption of the world right now is that the intelligentsia is to be located in the petty bourgeoisie, the learned representatives of and thinking representatives of imperialist white power, and even those who are African, who are thinking representatives of imperialist white power. Moreover, as African internationalists, we recognize that Africa has been under some kind of attack for millennia, but our struggle today is contextualized by the fact that the world economy that gives life to our oppression is a capitalist economy. We say this because it is true that the trans-Saharan slave trade, which was real, which was an Arab-based Islamic slave trade, lasted something like 1,500 years. And we get reminded of that from time to time by some people who want to liquidate the question of an all-African revolutionary movement. Our struggle is not fueled by a subjective need for vengeance against every group that has historically attacked Africa. This means that the struggle must be waged against the capitalist social. Let me read the paragraph leading to where I was now. We say, moreover, as African internationalists, we recognize that Africa has been under some kind of attack for millennia, but that our struggle today is contextualized by the fact that the world economy that gives life to our oppression is a capitalist economy. The entire world economy that we exist in, or it is the defining world economy. Our struggle is not fueled by a subjective need for vengeance against every group that has historically attacked Africa. This means that the struggle must be waged against the capitalist social system that is the basis of our exploitation and wretched conditions of existence today. Our struggle for the unification and emancipation of our Africa and our people is also a struggle against capitalism. Hence, our struggle, if it is to be fought to its successful conclusion, must be led by the African working class. It must result in the establishment of a united socialist Africa responsive to the needs of African people worldwide. So we're talking about we're fighting against the capitalist system, recognizing that the two social systems that are in contention, or the two social systems that are possible, is capitalism. This is a social system based on tremendous exploitation of the vast majority of the producing people, and socialism, which liquidates this particular contradiction and creates a situation where those who produce the value collectively own the value. So those who produce value socially become the social ownership, social owners of that value. And that's the struggle that has to be led by the producers of the value, which is the working class, and who will shape and give definition to the new society that we are that we're in the process of creating. African internationalism teaches us that slavery, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, along with African disunification and dispersal, provided the material basis for the European bourgeois national consolidation, the sense of white sameness, resting on the pedestal of the oppression of African and colonized peoples. The sense of white sameness, this is national consciousness of white people, stems from slavery, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, and our disunification and dispersal around the world. Hence, we understand that a key function of the revolutionary struggle for the permanent defeat of imperialism and to liberate Africa and her scattered children is the reunification of African people worldwide into a revolutionary proletarian nation. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created world trade. And it is world trade that is the condition of large-scale industry. These words by Marx recognize the role of the plunder of Africa in the establishment of capitalism and carry within them the suggestion of what it will take to destroy the capitalist world economy. The African who gave value to the colonies is now the oppressed and exploited inhabitant of the colonies that are sometimes incorrectly referred to as nations. Our conditions of existence in the so-called colonies and elsewhere in the world of imperialist created borders are centered in and derived from the conditions of existence in Africa that are the consequences of the primitive accumulation of capital, the original sin. Let me read this again. Our conditions of existence in the colonies, that is to say, around the world and elsewhere in this world of imperialist created borders, are centered in and derived from the conditions of existence in Africa that are the consequence of the primitive accumulation of capital, the original sin. Our revolutionary struggle for liberation, unification, and socialism in Africa throughout the colonies and other areas of the world to which we have been forcibly dispersed in the construction of capitalism will prove to be as significant in the defeat of capitalist social system as the slave trade was in its advent. The socialist liberation and unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class will be the central factor in the defeat of world capitalism and will provide the material basis for the advent of world socialism. African internationalism, which demands the total revolutionary liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide under the leadership of the African working class, is informed by this scientifically sound dialectic. Hence, the African internationalist struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people is at the same time the key factor in the achievement of socialism as a world economy. It is the way forward for those Marxists and other socialists who are confronted with the false conundrum surrounding the question of socialism in one country. As capitalism was born as a world economy with its basis in the enslavement and dispersal of African people, leading to, as Marx wrote, quote, considerable masses of capital and labor power in the hands of producers, unquote, so too will socialism be born as a world economy in the process of reversing the verdict of imperialism. Hence, socialism will not be born in one country, but in many countries that are tied to the defining economy of a liberated and united Africa and people under the revolutionary leadership of the African working class. This is why a fundamental task of the African revolutionary is the consolidation of the proletariat nation. There's a lot of stuff that's loaded in these few paragraphs that I just read. And I'm really calling on you to look at this and study this and more, even after this study, so that we can achieve much greater clarity in what it is that we're talking about here. Because this question of the nation is not a small question, because it says something about who it is that we are and what it is we're fighting for. You hear terms like national liberation all the time, and when it's referencing Black people. And we hear terms like Black liberation movement when it is referencing Black people. And I've heard just recently, someone has, an intellectual has appropriated the whole concept that we put forth all the time in terms of the need to liberate the whole people. The whole people is the nation. When we say the Black liberation movement, we're talking about the Black in this instance, meaning the nation. The national liberation movement is the nation. What is the nation? The nation is not 5 states in the South. It's not the Black Belt South in the United States. We're talking about a process that has its origin, as we said early on in this study, in the assault on Africa, the dispersal of African people and the theft of our material and the human resources. So on page 343, African petty bourgeoisie attacks Garvey and the nation. This was not the extent of our discussion of the nation in the political report to our 5th Congress. Then as now, we were engaging in a serious struggle with the ossified notions that have hampered and misdirected our struggle since the political defeat of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, led by Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. And as you know, on tomorrow is the birthday, the anniversary of Marcus Garvey. And on the 13th of this month was the date of the 100 years ago when the red, black, and green flag was adopted as the flag of African people. And it was adopted as the flag of African people at a UNIA convention. It was not the so-called African American flag. It was not a Pan-African flag. In fact, the Pan-Africanists had had a meeting the year before in Paris, France, as a part of the process of destroying the Garvey movement that raised up the red, black, and green as the flag of African people worldwide. At the time, the struggle for African national consolidation, though seriously debated, that is, at the time of Garvey, was essentially being advanced by the program of the UNIA, with its membership of 11 million Africans around the world, and its slogan of Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. Since its founding in 1919, the Communist Party USA had joined with an assortment of African liberals and the US government in hounding Garvey because of the UNIA's position on the African nation. In 1928, a resolution of the 6th Communist International held in Moscow admitted that Africans constituted a separate nation inside the US, just as the now deported Marcus Garvey had explicitly stated all along. The Communist Party USA was forced to reluctantly comply with this position, though not saying so. This came after the CPUSA, NAACP, and others had eagerly promoted and united with the US government's attack, imprisonment, and deportation of Garvey to Jamaica, the island of his birth. The Comintern's, or the Communist Internationalist position on the Negro question, as they called it, suggested that Africans were a nation within a contrived national homeland of the Black Belt South in the US. This manufactured nation of sorts, as described in the Negro question, which was their position paper, was designed to take advantage of the obvious national consciousness among the African population of the US, influenced by the successful Garvey movement that the CPUSA, that is the Communist Party, helped to destroy. The Communist Party of the United States attempted to infiltrate the UNIA with undercover communist organizers. As we have stated in African Internationalism versus Pan-Africanism, which was presented to the Conference to Build the African Socialist International, held in London in 2005 and printed in my book, One Africa, One Nation, the Communist Party did not address, quote, the fact that our homeland had been taken away from us and we from it, which is what Africans were responding to by joining the Garvey movement. The Communist Party of the United States, and sometimes they call themselves the United States Communist Party, and so, you know, the name changed at different times. And so we say the Communist Party, United States Black Belt South position, moreover, completely obscures the fact that the land of what is now called North and South America, including the Black Belt South, was stolen by Europeans from the indigenous people in the same genocidal process that brought about the birth of parasitic capitalism and the consolidation of the white nation. And it's really important to make this point, because there's a way that you end up accepting the definition of the nation and the definition of who we are supposed to be, because we live inside this territory now called the United States. There's a way that it liquidates the fact that the United States is a settler colony. Now, that's a really important issue. Just like if you can believe that settler colonialism was bad when it's applied to what was called, and is still called, South Africa, if you can believe that settler colonialism is bad when it's applied to occupied Palestine, now called Israel, then it's clear that settler colonialism, which is the same thing, Europeans leaving Europe to colonize territories and settling on those territories to extract all kinds of value, material and human value. So we said that this position of the Communist Party, this Black Belt South position, completely obscures the fact that the land of what is now called North and South America, including the Black Belt South, was stolen by Europeans from the indigenous people in the same genocidal process that brought about the birth of parasitic capitalism, and that the consolidation of the white nation. So this consolidation of the white nation and the birth of capitalism came through this whole attack. It was part of the process that stole this territory now called the United States of America from the indigenous population. So the indigenous people continue to suffer the consequences of this assault even today. This land belongs to the indigenous people. The Communist Party of USA's position nevertheless implicitly recognizes the commonality of national interests linking Africans worldwide. And so we say, even though they say, okay, you're not a nation, and they had to say we're not a nation because they wanted to organize in this country, they wanted to organize Africans who were followers of Garvey into this colonially dominated, controlled Communist Party organization, a settler colony, colonizer, leftist, Marxist, communist, or whatever you want to call it. These were the forces who were engaged in struggle, but they needed the body of forces to actually lead the struggle, and they recognized the critical relationship that the struggle and oppression of African people had to the defeat of capitalism in the United States and the world. So as opposed to following the leadership and supporting the work by Marcus Garvey, they denied, first of all, that Africans, and attacked Garvey, saying that Africans in this country were not a nation, And then because even they failed in winning the African masses from Garvey, even though they used like the African Blood Brotherhood, headed by a man named Cyril Briggs, who was a front for the Communist Party of the U.S., certainly was funded by them. They used Briggs to actually try to infiltrate the Garvey movement to turn it into a tool of the Communist Party. None of that worked. So after being unsuccessful in just convincing African people we simply chocolate-colored white workers with no interest of our own as a people, they had to concede because they were totally unsuccessful. Even after they had helped to destroy the Garvey movement, they were unsuccessful in winning massive African people into the Communist Party USA. So they now recognize that, okay, it's not working for us to call them chocolate-colored Black workers. So we see this whole nationalist consciousness among the African people. So they say, we're gonna make a concession that African people do constitute a nation, but your national homeland is not in Africa. Your ass staying here. And your national homeland is in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the so-called Black Belt South, where through slavery, you have been forged into a new nation, and this is where your national homeland rests. And so we're saying that it's a faulty conclusion. It's opportunistic as hell. It's opportunistic when it's called the Black Belt South theory that came from the Communist Party USA. And yes, I do know that they used Harry Haywood, who was a member of the Communist Party USA, who lived a long time in Russia, among other things, as the person who was the point person for that position. But Haywood, in his own writings, autobiography, admits that he didn't come up with that. In fact, he didn't believe that. He believed that the best thing for African people to do was be white workers, and et cetera. And it was a young communist in the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, that actually authored and put forth that position about the Black Belt South theory that he became so famously attached to. So anyway, here's what their position coming out of 1928. They say that we say here, the CPUSA's position nevertheless implicitly recognizes the commonality of national interests linking Africans worldwide. This passage is one example of that, and we quote, the Negro race everywhere is an oppressed race, whether it is a minority, USA, etc., majority, South Africa, or inhabits a so-called independent state, Liberia, etc. The Negroes are oppressed by imperialism. Thus, a common tie of interest is established for the revolutionary struggle of race and national liberation from imperialist domination of the Negroes in various parts of the world. So the Negroes in various parts of the world, he's going to have a common interest, which is what we talk about when we say that there is an African nation that has been forcibly dispersed around the world. Yes, there is a common interest. And then we say here, the 1928 Communist International resolution on the Negro question became the template for succeeding positions on the question by various Marxist organizations and an assortment of Black nationalists, some of whom were not communists and sometimes even anti-communist in their outlook. One of the most influential advocates of this position before his defection from the Communist International to the ranks of Pan-African anti-communism was George Padmore. Padmore was a well-known Trinidad-born activist who penned an authoritative book titled The Life and Struggles of Negro Toilers that was published by a section of the Communist International in 1931. Like the entire worldwide Marxist movement that made up the Communist International, Padmore was a rabid, visceral anti-Garveyite. The introduction of Padmore's 1931 work, written during the Great Depression, could have been written today considering the current economic crisis. Whether intentional or not, Padmore's book exposes his own opportunism and that of the Communist International he represented. Padmore uses all the evidence that supports Garvey's effort to organize the liberation of African nation. Padmore uses all the evidence that supports Garvey's efforts to organize the liberation of the African nation as the basis for joining and celebrating the attacks on Garvey. So it was attacks such as these that helped to destroy Garvey's extraordinary anti-imperialist movement for the happiness and material well-being of African people. Padmore's introduction inadvertently supports our party's position concerning the commonality of African conditions and interests internationally, our common national identity, its class character, and the African national territory that helps to define us as the nation, though dispersed. In other words, as Marcus Garvey might have said, that our condition and interests as African people are universal. Here's Padmore, quote. It's a long quote from Padmore, but it's interesting. You'll find it interesting. It has been estimated that there are about 250 million Negroes in the world. That's what whom he was talking to estimated. Garvey was saying 400 million. That was his estimation. Of course, anyway, the vast majority of these peoples are workers and peasants. They are scattered throughout various geographical territories. The bulk of them, however, still live on the continent of Africa, the original home of the Black race. There are, nevertheless, large populations of Negroes in the New World. For instance, there are about 15 million in the United States, 10 millions in Brazil, 10 millions in the West Indies, and 5 to 7 millions in various Latin American countries, such as Colombia, Honduras, Venezuela, Nicaragua, et cetera, et cetera. The oppression of Negroes assumes two distinct forms. On the one hand, they are oppressed as a class, and on the other as a nation. This national race oppression has its basis in the social economic relations of the Negro under capitalism. He says this national race oppression has its basis in the social economic relations of the Negro under capitalism. National race oppression assumes its most pronounced forms in the United States of America, especially in the Black Belt of the Southern states, where lynching, peonage, Jim Crowism, political disenfranchisement, and social ostracism is widespread. And that's a really interesting concept, social ostracism. And in the Union of South Africa, where the Blacks who form the majority of the entire population have been robbed of their lands and are segregated in reserves, enslaved in compounds, and subjected to the vilest forms of anti-labor and racial laws, poll hut, pass, taxes, and color bar systems in industry. The general condition under which Negroes live, either as a national racial group or as a class, form one of the most degrading spectacles of bourgeois civilization. Since the present crisis of world capitalism began, the economic, political, and social status of the Negro toilers are becoming ever worse and worse. The reason for this is obvious. The imperialists, whether American, English, French, Belgian, et cetera, are frantically trying to find a way out of their difficulties. In order to do so, they are not only intensifying the exploitation of the white workers in the various imperialist countries by launching an offensive through means of rationalization, wage cuts, or abolition of social insurance, unemployment, et cetera, but they are turning their attention more and more towards Africa and other Black semi-colonies, Haiti, Liberia, which represent the last stronghold of world imperialism. In this way, the bourgeoisie hope to unload the major burden of the crisis on the Black colonial and semi-colonial masters. I'm not even gonna work too much with that. I mean, the fact is he's talking about how they are now turning their attention more and more toward Africa and other. When did they turn their attention away from Africa? I mean, the whole social system rests upon enslaving and colonized Black people in Africa, in the Americas, as Padmore has already shown, and throughout the United States of America. But he has a different point that he has to make, and he has a responsibility of showing ultimately the principal force, social force, as being the white working class, who he would refer to as the industrial working class. Padmore's introduction continues to assert, quote, "It is also necessary for the workers of the capitalist countries to understand that it is only through the exploiting of the colonial workers, here we go, from whose sweat and blood super profits are extorted, that the imperialists are able to bribe the reformists and social fascist trade union bureaucrats and thereby enable them to portray the struggles of the workers," unquote. There are a number of erroneous assumptions found in Padmore's words. It is clear that he does not recognize that capitalism was born as parasitic white power and liberated the European bourgeoisie and working class from the fetters of feudal social system. He does not understand that this occurred at the expense of Africans and the oppressed of the world that are overturning the historical relationship at the very moment of this, our party's 6th Congress. Capitalism represented progress only for European development for the workers, the bourgeoisie, and society in general. Padmore does not, that's only, the capitalism came into existence and only represented progress for white people, for the bourgeoisie, for the working class, for others who were part of European society. Padmore does not explain why the imperialists would try to, as he put it, find their way out of their difficulties by, quote unquote, turning their attention more and more towards Africa and other Black semi-colonies. Of course, for African internationalists, 21st century Garveyites, the answer is simple. It is the raw, terror-laden exploitation of Africa upon which the entire imperialist edifice rests. What Padmore warns the white workers about, the super profits coming from the colonies, is normal capitalist function. There is nothing super about these profits. The thing that may make the profits appear to be super is simply the fact that white workers, as part of the white nation, share in the imperialist exploitation of the rest of us. The concept of super profits muddles the fact that the vast majority of Africans and other colonized workers constitute the true base of capitalist exploitation, and always have. The fact is that the level of profit extracted from this relationship is normal. White workers achieve a greater return for the value of their labor power because they exist as part of a parasitic nation that originates from parasitic capitalism stemming from slavery and colonialism. So-called super profits infer an exceptional level of exploitation. However, it is the white or European oppressor nation worker that experiences the exceptional relationship with capitalism. Ours is not an exceptional relationship, it is the norm. It is the European oppressor nation worker that experiences a so-called super relationship with capitalism that is revealed in the different conditions of existence experienced by European workers and the rest of us. Padmore's concerns about the reformers and social fascist trade union bureaucrats is also misdirected. While reformism certainly is a problem when it comes to the issues within the European white nation, the real question is opportunism. The tendency to sacrifice the long-term interests of the struggle against imperialism rooted in the colonial question for the short-term interests of white workers, which can only be served at the expense of the rest of us, something the white working class as a social force has never hesitated to do. Perhaps the root of Padmore's opposition to Garvey and true African national liberation can be found in his characterization of social ostracism as one of the oppressive consequences defining the conditions of existence of Africans colonized within the US. The question is, social ostracism from whom? The issue of social ostracism only concerns those whose interest is in integrating, assimilating into the social domain of the white oppressor nation, not those who recognize their interest in liberating the African nation. Imagine Nat Turner running around, being offended for being ostracized socially from white society. Do you think so? This struggle for Black or African national independence is usually called Black separatism, a subjective response by whites who never speak of the Declaration of Independence proclaiming the establishment of the US bourgeois state on stolen indigenous land as a declaration of separation. However, it is in the section of his book entitled Revolutionary Perspective that Padmore unleashes the full force of his venom on Garvey and the struggle for African national emancipation. According to Padmore, and we quote again, the struggle against Garveyism represents one of the major tasks of the Negro toilers in America and the African and West Indian colonies. Why must we struggle against Garveyism? As the program of the Communist International correctly states, Garveyism is a dangerous ideology which bears not a single democratic trait and which toys with the aristocratic attributes of a non-existent Negro kingdom. It must be strongly resisted, for it is not a help but a hindrance to the mass Negro struggle for liberation against American imperialism. Garvey is more than a dishonest demagogue who, taking advantage of the revolutionary wave of protests of the Negro toilers against imperialist oppression and exploitation, was able to crystallize a mass movement in America in the years immediately after the war. His dishonesty and fraudulent business schemes, such as the Black Star Line, through which he extorted millions and millions of dollars out of the sweat of the Negro working class, soon led to his imprisonment. After his release, Garvey was deported back to Jamaica, his native country. Isolated from the main body of the organization, Garvey has been unable to maintain his former autocratic control over the movement, as a result of which there has been a complete disintegration of the organization, which is now under the control of a number of warring factional leaders. And Padmore continues, quote, despite the bankruptcy of the Garvey movement, the ideology of Garveyism, which is the most reactionary expression in Negro bourgeois nationalism, still continues to exert some influence among certain sectors of the Negro masses. The Black landlords and capitalists who support Garveyism are merely trying to mobilize Negro workers and peasants to support them in establishing a Negro republic in Africa, where they would be able to set themselves up as the rulers in order to continue the exploitation of the toilers of their race, free from white imperialist competition. In its class content, Garveyism is alien to the interests of the new Negro toilers. Like Zionism and Gandhiism, it is merely out to utilize the racial and national consciousness for the purpose of promoting the class interests of the Black bourgeoisie and landlords. In order to further their own aims, the leaders of Garveyism have attempted to utilize the same demagogic methods of appeal used by the leaders of Zionism. For example, the promise of back to Africa, behind which slogan Garvey attempts to conceal the truly imperialist aims of the Negro bourgeoisie. So this is George Padmore. This is somebody who contributed to a major war against the Garvey movement. It's interesting that much of what I've read up to now comes when Padmore was a really important figure in the Communist International, in this so-called African section. But even when he became an anti-communist, his venomous attacks on Garvey continued, and when he was working hand in glove with W.E.B. Du Bois. So let's read further. We have a few more minutes that we can share. We have been generous in the space given Padmore because he is one of the best representatives of this backward view on the struggle of African national liberation that poses as progressive. It is clear that without intending to do so, Padmore validates Garvey's positions when he says, quote, the oppression of Negroes assumes two distinct forms. On the one hand, they are oppressed as a class, and on the other as a nation, unquote. However, echoing many of the written attacks on Garvey by W.E.B. Du Bois, Padmore goes on to manufacture conclusions about Garvey's intentions that cannot be substantiated by science and rely solely on clearly prejudiced, subjective rantings. It is instructive that Padmore's great fear is the so-called imperialist aims of the Garvey movement at a time when there were only two nominally independent countries on the continent of Africa, and the entire African world was locked in a stranglehold of white colonial slavery. So Garvey is the problem. That's the imperialist aims of Garvey is the problem. It borders on insanity that Padmore's fears would be directed at an alleged intent on Garvey to create a Black imperialism in Africa that would, in fact, overturn a real existing white imperialism. The movement to stop Garvey, of which Padmore was an illustrious participant, was in reality a movement to protect white imperialist domination of Africa from African people ourselves. It is clear how Padmore's position against Garvey mirrors that of the white ruling class, blaming Garvey for the imperialist attacks that were responsible for Garvey's imprisonment and deportation, as well as the destruction of the UNIA, events that Padmore gleefully describes. His barely concealed joy at the downfall of Garvey and the UNIA reveals a commonality of interest among the imperialist white ruling class, Padmore and the Communist International on one side, and Garvey, along with the millions of Africans who supported him and the UNIA vision of national liberation on the other side. 3 years after the publication of his book, Padmore left the Communist International, perhaps after discovering it was the headquarters of reformers and social fascists from whom he wanted to protect the white workers. He would eventually end up a Pan-Africanist in the company of W.E.B. Du Bois, whom he had characterized in this same book as a petty bourgeois reformist. It was more a virulent anti-communist. He was now a virulent anti-communist and author of the book Pan-Africanism or Communism, for which he is probably best known and revered by a petty bourgeois Pan-Africanist. As we stated in African Internationalism versus Pan-Africanism, quoted above, quote, people ask, can there be revolutionary Pan-Africanists? I think that's an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. Pan-Africanism does not have the ability to recognize the class question. Therefore, whoever wants to be a Pan-Africanist can be. Let's see. People ask, can there be a revolutionary Pan-Africanist? I think that's an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. Pan-Africanism does not have the ability to recognize the class question. Therefore, whoever wants to be a Pan-Africanist can be. Kwame Nkrumah was a communist, but I've been in London with people who call themselves Pan-Africanists who are anti-communist. A Pan-Africanist is whoever or whatever somebody who calls himself a Pan-Africanist wants to be. So I think, let me just read just for another 2 or 3 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to you, comrades. Pan-Africanism liquidates the class contradiction that's killing us all over the world. To win the total liberation and unification of Africa and consolidate our nation, we have to be absolutely clear. African internationalism informs us that the African working class, aligned with the poor peasants, must unequivocally lead this struggle for African liberation. Every other class force wavers in its loyalty to an imperialist white power that affords them the promise of material or other benefits at the expense of the suffering African working class and the subjugated African nation. The success of the Garvey movement and its program is the best concrete evidence of the sense of sameness experienced by Africans worldwide. The UNIA was an organization of several million members and supporters throughout the world, including Australia. Its influence continues to be experienced by Africans even today, a century after its founding. The Garvey movement, a 1921 convention on the Negro peoples of the world held in Manhattan at Madison Square Garden, attracted between 25 and 50,000 people from throughout the African world. This was an amazing accomplishment at a time when communications and transportation were considerably more difficult than they are today, and our national oppression placed formidable constraints on our mobility, both within the US and in colonial territories in Africa and elsewhere. The historic Garvey Movement Convention was the only place in the world that afforded Africans a democratic opportunity to vote their political preferences. Marcus Garvey was elected the provincial provisional president of Africa by convention attendees, and the red, black, and green flag was adopted as the national colors of African people. So I am Comrade Director. I'm going to stop here and open it up so that people who want to can engage in questions and discussions after you make that possible.
Uhuru, Chairman, well, I just really want to appreciate the study and the continuation on the question of the African nation. And I really also want to appreciate you opening up this time. We are extending the time for more people to be able to ask questions and get your questions answered by the chairman. So I want to encourage everyone right now to take this opportunity to ask the chairman questions. If you have not already posed your question in the comment section, go ahead and do that now, either Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching. Type your question into the comments because we want to get to them. And this is a splendid opportunity to do so with the chairman right here live, ready to do so. So before we get into some of the questions that have already come in, I wanted to recognize where people are watching from. We have Lawrenceville, Georgia, Lakeland, Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Pinellas Park, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Occupy Tanzania, Bermuda, West Unity, Ohio, Seattle, Washington, Gainesville, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, Kuwait, San Diego, California, Oakland, California, Mobile, Alabama, and Frankfurt, Germany so far. So if you did not let us know where you're watching from, go ahead and also let us know where you're tuning in from. So, and we also had, I wanted to recognize just a statement says Uhuru comrades from Benjamin Prado, the Undersecretary General of Unión del Barrio, which is a Mexican liberation organization. So I just want to salute and say Uhuru to Benjamin and Unión del Barrio. All right, so one of our first questions came in from from Skeptical Mantis on YouTube. Says, ask if Black people took over the South, could they reach an agreement? Oh, hold on, is that right? Yes. Could they reach an agreement with the indigenous people? I'm guessing southern U.S.
Well, the problem there, of course, is that the whole 5-state Black Belt South position is absolutely and totally an opportunistic line, because it's one that's pursued, objectively speaking, against the interests of the indigenous people, who a fundamental aspect of whose struggle revolves around the fact that that the land was stolen and they're stuck on concentration camps in their own land. So regardless of what the intention is, the fact is that by struggling for the land of the indigenous people as the national homeland of African people, we end up uniting with this ongoing aggression against the indigenous people. So I would assume that would make it extremely difficult, because we would just become another arm of an oppressive attack on the indigenous people for their land and resources. So I believe that we in this boat together, and that Africans have to see ourselves as a part of the revolution of the Americas, even as we talk about African national liberation and the liberation of Africa itself, that African people who have been forcibly dispersed throughout the Americas are part, objectively speaking, of the revolution of the Americas. And we recognize that the US is a settler colony, among other things. And that means that we unite with indigenous people in the struggle against US settler colonialism for taking the land of the indigenous people, even as we engage in the struggle for national liberation, political independence of African people. That's both on the continent of Africa, and we say, and wherever African people are located. The details of how that looks can and must be worked out, but the starting point has to be that this land is the land of indigenous people, and that's not the starting point when you even get to the point of saying, can we work? How is it that can we work out some kind of relationship with indigenous people? We can't on those terms, on the terms of the Black Belt South, of the whole 5-state position. We can't, but we can recognize that we are part of the same struggle of the indigenous people on their land, fighting against settler colonialism against those who have colonized us on the same land. Uhuru. I hope that was helpful. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Yeah, we have a well, because I know you talked about the question of the Black Belt South just in this study too, and I think we have a similar question to that. So I'm going to go ahead and follow up with it. It comes from Melanin Material on YouTube. Asks, can we use the recent, and I don't know if you know about it, but the recent McGirt case in Oklahoma that gave the natives their land as a precursor to claim our lands in America as an indigenous Black people?
If what you want to do is get white people to give you permission to be free, yeah, you can try that as well. What I'm saying is the African People's Socialist Party has concluded a long time ago, African internationalism teaches us that what has to happen is that we're going to have to overturn this relationship completely, that the courts are colonial courts. They are colonial courts. Even the court that has to concede so-called the rights of the indigenous people in Oklahoma is a colonial court. And so you can see that as some kind of tactic that you can use politically and what have you to try and gain some kind of advantage. But the main thing we say is that we are not going to be able to litigate our way out of the oppression that we experience. Because the fact is that the colonizer makes the law, establishes the court systems, and that whenever the court system appears to do something that is favorable to African people, is because it's in the interest of the colonial state, or it's in the interest of the colonizer as perceived by some leading sector of the white colonizer ruling class. So we have to seek our own solutions. And so, as I said, that if there may be some tactical advantage and political advantage that gives us an opportunity to raise some kind of question about land based on the concession that the government appears to have made to the indigenous people based on a court case in Oklahoma, there may be some temporary advantage that can be achieved there, but we can't do that sacrificing the interests of African people for absolute total liberation from this land, this court, this whole social system, from the ability of the colonial court to tell us, what kind of rights we got in terms of land of any other thing like that. We have to have, we are preparing to govern in the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement. Our objective is to be in charge of our own affairs, to recreate dual power. We want all the power. And the concept of dual power is just the concept of incrementally taking power that is controlled by the bourgeoisie, that is in the hands of the colonial state, taking that power and to eliminate it, taking that power and to eliminate that power so that we can have all the power for African people. That's what we're about.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, the questions like rolling in, so I'm trying to get all of them. So people are taking this opportunity, and I really appreciate it. So let's get into the next question. Well, this is actually a comment, but you might want to.
Let me say this. Conceptually, it is possible to conceive of something the comrade was talking about. I think it's skeptical somebody was talking about in terms of some kind of political assault through the court system to take some possession of some kind of land. But again, it is a political act that uses try to use the court system. And it can be conceptually, it can be something that is designed to forge this whole process of dual power. But the whole notion of somehow getting power, getting our power through this court system, giving us the right to land of the indigenous people, that is absolutely something that that we reject. Uhuru. Sorry about that, Comrade.
No, it's okay, Chairman. All right, so this comment, like I said, you might want to expound on it if you feel it necessary. This comes from Tachara Masimba on Facebook and in St. Louis. It says, Uhuru Chairman, Garvey was significant in my opinion because he created a dual and contending power with the petty bourgeoisie African heads of state, as well as with the international bourgeoisie. He went around the political process of the 50-something Balkanized neo-colonial territories and gave us a model for an international African state power and economy. He was elected president away from home in a democratic process. One resolution coming out of the 1921 convention stated that no African existing in or outside of Africa shall join the military of any non-African power without approval by this consolidated international African power. It truly represented a new type of power.
Uhuru.
Comrade T'Challa.
Uhuru. And we should say that that was 1920 convention, not 1921. Okay. Yeah. This month is the 100th anniversary of that month-long convention of the Negro peoples of the world that was held in New York at Madison Square Garden, all of August. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So our next question comes from Nasir Alamin in Kuwait, and hold on. Okay. So he says, I tuned in late, so this may have been addressed. Can the chairman speak to not just the selection of Kamala Harris, but the prevalent narrative amongst some Black women that we need to unite behind her as a people, that we as a Black people pull each other down? And he also says, please convey my appreciation to the chairman as he studies and following them up with the reading in Vanguard has deepened my understanding of the world and my role in it.
Uhuru, thank you, comrade. By the way, I know there was a Facebook message I think you sent to me, and Comrade Elikia will be getting back to you responding to that. But yeah, it's the, you know, the thing is that the petty bourgeoisie, especially at high tides of struggle, especially, but not only then, intervenes in our movement and tries to define it, take leadership over it, and even what should help to make that clear is the use of people like, by the bourgeoisie, people like Barack Hussein Obama and like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, that's her name, isn't it, Harris? The use of these forces sort of as Pied Pipers, and to, as part of what their significance is, to keep African people locked into the social system itself, keep African people locked into the bourgeois political party and political process, and stand in the way of African people being able to find our own solution. Somebody was talking to me this morning about how Angela Davis was demonstrating all kinds of ecstasy about the selection by Joe Biden, the policeman, the supranational policeman who put, with Clinton's help, more than 100,000 pigs in our community that assassinated Black people all around this country, even leading to the rebellion that happened on May 25th. This Joe Biden, who picks Kamala, who herself was some kind of super pig in California. I don't mean pig. I mean cop. I mean a prosecutor. I mean a person who puts, whose job is to put African people in prison, in jail. And so now, because she's African, Angela Davis is, jumping up and down and doing, a kind of, even if infirm, cartwheels about her selection. And this is the petty bourgeoisie, and it just goes to show, like what a farce some of these creatures of the 1960s, in particular Angela. We had fights with Angela Davis throughout the 1960s, and who Angela Davis, who left the Communist Party with a group of others, creating what they call a committee of what did they call, a correspondence, that was an imitation of the white people who split from Britain during a precursor to the so-called American independence. I mean, they would call themselves the Committee of Correspondence, and the reason they split from the Communist Party because they were right of the Communist Party USA, which had utilized what congressional strategy. As opposed to making revolution, they would try to influence the Congress by supporting this congressperson, that congressperson. And so because the Communist Party did not support the Negro who was running for governor of Virginia, who won, by the way, then her and another group of Africans split from the Communist Party. So the history of Angela Davis is not sterling. It's just something that that people could believe to be sterling precisely because it was handy and convenient for the bourgeoisie. So this whole notion that somehow putting, how do they put it, a lipstick on a pig, so you have this situation, how because she's an African woman, somehow this feminist thing is supposed to be something we fight for. If I fought for an African woman, it would be for Achille Nai. I fight for that leadership. Yejide Oronmila, it would be Deputy Chair Onozane Ishitela. It would be Aisha Fields. It would be these incredible African women who represent the African Revolution, the party here in South Africa and also in Bermuda now. So, we, and throughout our work, people who actually want to make a revolutionary transformation and push imperialism off of our back. And to say that because they picked an African woman, somehow we should hold that up, when the fact of the matter is, one reason they picked the African woman is to lock African people into the Democratic Party, into the party of imperialism. It has nothing to do with liberating Black people, Black women. And in fact, it's an assault on the dignity and rights of African women to consider Kamala Harris a representative of Black women. That's a joke. She's a representative of Joe Biden and Hillary and the Clintons and every other vicious assault that's been made and being made right now as we have this discussion on African people. Uhuru. I hope I responded adequately to that.
Uhuru, Chairman. I mean, I thought that was that was so good. And I know there's so much we can say about that, but yeah, I just really appreciate that. So this question, next question comes from Marcus Louison, I hope I pronounced that right, on YouTube, says, two-part question. In your mind, what are the key distinctions between communism and socialism? And two, does capitalism have any redeeming qualities at all?
Yeah, that's a good question, because some people say that we suffer, Africans in various places around the world. They would see people impoverished in the Philippines, people impoverished some other place around the world, in the Middle East, et cetera. And they say the reason is because the people really need capitalism, and they get capitalism. Well, that's what they got, capitalism. Capitalism is the virus that's affecting and afflicting the peoples of the world, including Africans in Africa and various other places around the world. So it has no redeeming qualities. It is something that was created, what came into existence off colonial slavery, and the theft of the land of indigenous peoples around the world. It has nothing redeeming about it. And the only ones who experience something that they might characterize as beneficial are the colonizer, people of the colonizer nation. And when I say the colonizer nation, I'm talking about even the ability of Marxists and other people like that to characterize the advent of capitalism as being progressive in human society, because it was not progressive for the vast majority of the peoples of the world. It was progressive for the people of Europe in particular. And that includes not only the bourgeoisie, but it included those toilers, if you will, who were peasants and locked on the land and now liberated through, as a consequence of development, capitalist emergence through slavery and colonialism that provided the resources that gave rise to what is called the capitalist working class. This is why they say it was progressive. Because if you look at the numbers of Africans who died in Congo, Africans who died in what they call the Atlantic slave trade, and what have you, the numbers of Africans who died subsequent to that in various places around the world, you can't call anything like that progress. And the fact that there is no electrical grid in Sierra Leone today, there is no infrastructure throughout most of Africa today, and the fact that wherever African people are existing today under such poor circumstances is due to the advent of capitalist assault on Africa and our capacity to be a self-governing, self-reliant people. So there's nothing positive and progressive about in terms of the difference in socialism and communism. I'm really glad you raised that question, because we got a lot of people running around calling themselves socialists. They call themselves socialists like Bernie Sanders, who was a fraud of the first class. I mean, if they were given awards out for biggest fraud of the period, I mean, Bernie Sanders would be getting a blue ribbon. The fact is that this whole notion that you somehow socialism means that you can get $15 an hour, it's a pathetic. $15 an hour over a number of years. Even the most reactionary trade union bosses have a stronger position that over a number of years, you get $15 an hour, and $15 an hour ain't dooley squat. When the fact is that socialism is that juncture where the working class becomes collective owners of the means of production. Take it away from the bourgeoisie. You cannot have socialism and capitalism coexisting in the same social space. The workers have to take power. That's why everybody who would call themselves socialists, especially these democratic socialists, quote unquote, that somehow they're going to distinguish a democracy, that a socialism, that's the kind of socialism that would be opposed to the notion that the African workers have to seize power. We're not seizing power. We are democratic socialism. Let's elect Biden. Or not Biden. Well, there are Sanders is working for Biden too right now. So I guess that's part of the trajectory. Let's elect Pamela, according to Angela, who is supposed to be a socialist and that kind of thing. So socialism is actually the workers have to take power. You got to take power. Capitalism is not going to concede power. That's why they're putting trillions of dollars all the time into military expenditures. That's why they spy on different organizations. That's why they characterize us as Black, some kind of extremists. That's why, they are starving. And even now, as we have this discussion of putting sanctions on Syria and Iran and all these other places to starve them out, to make sure that they can maintain this parasitic capitalist stranglehold on them. So socialism requires the defeat of capitalism. It requires the defeat of capitalism, one. And two, socialism is that stage in history when the working class becomes the owners, collective owners of the means of production. And socialism, as it relates to communism, is simply the early stage of communism, at which time the eradication of class distinctions and class contradictions and will have been removed from human society, and there is no difference between workers and producers and other people in society. The elimination of most of the contradictions resolving from capitalist production and capitalist socialist relations have been, that has occurred. That's communism. That's who we are. We are communists. We are for the total destruction of the capitalist system and the rise of the African working class as the ruling class, as a part of the movement toward absolutely total eradication of class in the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much for that breakdown, Chairman. And the questions are still rolling in. So we have two people asked the same question. Cheryl Williams on Facebook and our comrade Henok in Bermuda asked, can you please elaborate on why Pan-Africanism is incorrect for liberation of African people? And Henok asks, can you expound on the differences between revolution and Pan-Africanism? So that's I'm putting that together.
Let me just say this, like I'm talking about this as though it is some kind of common understanding. It is not a common understanding. And many of the people who are part of our party and our movement are young and new to political life, and certainly the revolutionary political life. But most people who engaged in any kind of political activity and struggle today are new to revolutionary political life. We've gone for something like 3 generations after the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. That was a global revolution that was making itself manifest all over the world, from Vietnam, China, to throughout the Americas and parts of Africa. That movement was crushed, and inside this country it was crushed as well. So this revolutionary trajectory was something that was defeated, and it has not been talked about. It has not been advanced. You don't even hear too many forces at all talking about revolution. Our party has been leading this discussion around a revolution. So what we are talking about today is the fact that we have assumed responsibility as the party, as the advanced detachment. We didn't just do it yesterday. We didn't do it on May 26th. We didn't do it on August 10th after the murder of Mike Brown. This is stuff we've been working with, and you see that we quote documents and papers and positions that we've had since the 1970s. We've been waging this struggle, and not just empty position papers that you hear coming from these revolutionary academics to coin a phrase, but engage in trying to solve the problems of the revolution so our people can be free. That's what we've been doing. So what I'm talking about now is African internationalism. It is a revolutionary political theory, because if the working class, African working class, does not have possession of our own theory, our own philosophy, we end up borrowing theory and philosophy from the bourgeoisie. Pan-Africanism as a political force came into existence. I'm not saying somebody didn't say Pan-Africanism a long time ago, something to that effect. It came into existence as a political force with the work of W.E.B. Du Bois and the NAACP, because that's who Du Bois was representing when he made this major assault against Garvey. The NAACP's position against Garvey, Garveyism, is the same today as it was then. And Garvey, of course, is not physically here on earth, but the politics, the philosophy is something that is expressed in various ways, various iterations throughout the world and in this country. And NAACP's position is the same now as it was then. I'm not saying that there might not be a militant NAACP president in Indianapolis or something like that. That may be the case. I mean, Robert Williams was the head of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina. When they kicked him out, of course, because he armed against their instructions, against their own pronouncements and determination. Williams, in fighting Ku Klux Klan terror, armed those Black people in Monroe, North Carolina to protect themselves. So I'm not saying there not being exceptional NAACP. Ella Baker was one of the most important organizers of NAACP at a particular time in her history, et cetera. So there have been some exceptions as an organization, as a phenomenon, as something that came into existence as that. And so the whole thing that we look at when we talk about Pan-Africanism, it was forged apart as an ideological assault on African fundamentalism and the work that Garvey was doing, and a political assault to the extent that Du Bois even worked with the American government to do what could be done to stop the Garvey movement, to bring it down. Actually went to Africa and did everything he could to frustrate the efforts and the work that Garvey had done to create an independent base in Liberia, where all kinds of monies had been sent, resources and land created. In fact, the land that Garvey had purchased, the UNIA, it was they who discovered the rubber plants that was there and put it in their newspaper. And today, as a consequence of what Du Bois and the Pan-Africanists did, that land is owned by Firestone, right? So we don't own that, but we would have owned it under Garvey's watch. And the Pan-Africanists did everything they could to make that impossible. And the Pan-Africanists hated Garvey. The rulers of this country would have us believe that the reason that the struggle between Garvey and Du Bois was some kind of personality issue, but it was clear it was not that. Du Bois bragged about the fact that he was working with the colonial powers when he was doing this this Pan-Africanist work, he bragged about that he was not like Garvey. They were not violent. They were not trying to overthrow anything. They actually worked with colonial powers. If you don't, I've recommended this before, but the book Race First by Tony Martin, which I believe is probably the most authoritative book I think is recognized on Garvey that you can find, shows all of that. So that's Pan-Africanism. And African internationalism is, we call it 21st century Garveyism. Because Garvey's organization, one of the reasons Du Bois hated Garvey's organization is because Du Bois was an elitist who put forth, as you know, with the NAACP, this whole notion of the talented 10% of the Black population, the most educated, upper classes, et cetera, should be the rulers and authority over the rest of us, of course, working for white power. And Garvey's movement was based among the working class, the working people and what have you. And this is one of the reasons that it was that Du Bois would hate the Garvey movement and would hate Marcus Garvey and what have you. So it was an ideological thing. And then Du Bois even came up at one juncture with the ridiculous claim that Garvey's talk about Africa and going to Africa, et cetera, was ridiculous because Black people couldn't, in the United States, couldn't live in Africa because the temperature, the climate and things like that. And Du Bois was a very erudite, well-educated, he was a brilliant man. I mean, and he's written some stuff that even we would quote from just in terms of how clear he was. And he said this about Africa, it wasn't because of a lack of clarity or lack of knowledge, he was lying. And he has done that before. Again, he was an elitist, et cetera. So African internationalism is entirely different, and Pan-Africanism is a movement of petty bourgeois forces. It has been. It was then. It is now. Even with some of those forces who I know personally, did work with, did struggle with, and characterize as such in things that we've written and talked about up to now. So it's fundamentally this whole Pan-Africanist thing is something that serves the petty bourgeoisie and not the African working people who need to be free. And it's not a theory, by the way. Pan-Africanism is not. It's just a concept. What's the theory there? You know, anybody who claims to be a Pan-Africanist can do so. And there's no theoretical basis for saying, nope, you're not one. Unless they, you know, some of them can say, I'm a New York-based Pan-Africanist. I'm a New York Pan-Africanist, you know, et cetera. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman, for that clarification. The next question comes from Life Malcolm on YouTube. It says, Uhuru, Chairman, how was Castro's Cuba able to maintain its autonomy while struggling to overturn imperialism?
Cuba had a very difficult time, still does have a difficult time, because Cuba, like most of the Marxists, and including what we saw happen in Vietnam, China, even what came to be the Soviet Union, made the assumption that somehow the capture of political power within the context of this existing world economy, which was a capitalist world economy, the whole world economy is a capitalist world economy. And in places, some places you saw temporary islands, if you will, a socialist, quote unquote, kind of oasis in a sea of sharks, of capitalists, of the whole capitalist world. And at the moment, of course, what was called the Soviet Union, because it made the same errors, because the whole the whole capitalist economy rests upon a foundation of colonialism. The reason the capitalists were so successful as compared to the Russians, as compared to the Cubans, as compared to China, is because the capitalists, the Western, as they like to call it, the West, which means the white people in certain parts of Europe, they had access to the colonial booty. They were the ones who were able to exploit Jamaica, exploit all the Americas, to take resources from these places, from Asia and all these other places. Even today, there's a huge struggle that's going on between the United States and China for control of the South China Sea and who's going to be the governing force there. Even today, you know, people who are trying to make a living and trying to survive in the quote unquote Middle East are having to deal with criminal imperialism, American and other imperialism. Even the borders of what is now known as the Middle East were carved and created by by white power, white people, especially the French and the British, and the United States played a role here too. And so this is, what we're looking at. And so this whole notion, how did Cuba survive? Cuba was able to survive mainly because the Soviet Union was a powerful force until it ran into its limitations based on the fact that it didn't have anybody to exploit, like the Americans did. The Americans economically quarantined the Soviet Union so that it could not have access to any of the colonies, the colonial booty that was going to Europe, that was going to America. And so the Soviet Union was able to make some immediate, after the revolution, some immediate changes that were really impressive because they got rid of feudalism. There was a semi-feudal country, what Russia was. And now you get rid of the feudalism, that means it opened up land that the peasants not have any possession, any access to. Now the peasants have land. Now the aristocracy is brought down, and ordinary people can go to college, universities, can become doctors, can even join the military and be successful in the military. That wasn't possible before. So you see the immediate kind of progress that emerges. Now there are hospitals because the workers, the sector of the workers have access to power, and they create hospitals where the semi-colonial forces, the other forces in Russia wouldn't do that. The feudal forces wouldn't do that. So now all of this is, and so you see this immediate development that happened in the Soviet, in what came to be the Soviet Union, but it ran into its limitations. Soon, the quarantine continued to exist. Even what you see in terms of the assault that Trump is making now on the arrangement of the bourgeoisie, on the Atlanticist arrangement, which was created for the purpose of isolating, in part, isolating Russia, the Soviet Union, to make sure that it could not have access to markets, it could not have access to political resources in Europe and other places, and wherever the colonial powers were dominant. That's what's under attack now by the Trump administration. Of course, you see Russia reemerging, not as the Soviet Union, but as a contending force that's there. So Castro and the Soviet and Cuba, they suffered mightily. Then momentarily, it looked like it was going to be a lot better because of the emergence of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, which makes it hard to believe that the US government didn't kill Chavez. I don't care what the medics say, but it's hard to believe that they didn't kill Chavez. And he built a popular movement that excited, and along with the Cubans, were able to excite masses of people, and even some heads of state in South America, et cetera, for a period of time. And that's difficult now. So Cuba has been able to make it, but it hasn't been able to make it the way that one would suppose that a socialist, a communist, a socialist society should be able to make it, given the fact that the working people, have what approximates, a level of power that they certainly couldn't have in the United States and most other places around the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. The next question comes from AG on YouTube. And they posed this question a few weeks ago, but it wasn't spoken to. So, in the strive for indigenous and African peoples to regain control of their land, should it be encouraged to acquire as much land as possible, even within the capitalist system?
Well, you want to get land. I mean, that's it. But you can't make the mistake that acquiring land within the capitalist system is the solution. As you may know, that our party is engaged all the time in creating what we call dual power institutions. I mean, we have taken land in different circumstances. I mean, and right now we have an amazing project called Black Power Blueprint right here in St. Louis, where we've actually begun transforming an African community, and to the horror of the rulers in St. Louis. And I imagine it's bigger than St. Louis because it's a place where the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency is creating a massive multi-billion dollar headquarters there. So they're upset. And then there's the local Black office holders, especially in one of the wards where we're doing much of our development work, and they are doing everything they can to stop it, to keep it from emerging, et cetera, on that land. So the thing is, yeah, we want to get land, but we can't have any illusions that this is the answer. That we call this the struggle of dual power. And the objective, of course, is put the people center to all of this stuff that we're talking about, the capture of power. We want state power, but it can't function, it can't last, it can't win unless the people are connected to it. And even then, it's tentative. So yeah, we should try to acquire land if it's part of a process, a project of liberation. But you don't do that as an individual. You can't have your own independent individual liberation strategy that you're carrying out by yourself. It's part of a revolutionary project. It has to be. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. All right, next question comes from Aaron Smith on Facebook, says, how should we operate during this current political presidential campaign?
Well, I think what's really important is that we have to have an independent voice. And part of what we've been doing with within the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, this is one of the things. There are several things we're doing because we're operating on a lot of different fronts, talking about specific to the United States now. You may see some of the work that we're doing through what we characterize as the solidarity movement. These are mostly white forces who are organized under the direct leadership of our party. They're engaged in major work for demanding reparations, not by asking Trump or the US Congress or something like that to give reparations. Major assault on major economic institutions, number one, like Bank of America is one of them, where we have regular demonstrations, and these are mass demonstrations where people in Boston see them, people in New York see these demonstrations, people in St. Louis see these demonstrations, people in St. Petersburg, Florida see these demonstrations and have the ability to learn and unite with them, because nobody likes the banks, by the way. And so even the white people don't like the banks, and so they see this, and so that's one aspect. The other thing that we're doing is on this front, is that we're wanting more and more white people as individuals who voluntarily make contributions to the movement as reparations. And they say this is conscious determination. There are thousands and thousands of people who we have affected going directly to the people, and which is a critical, strategic thrust of the African People's Socialist Party to build reparations. So that's part of what it is that we do. And that we are doing, but we're fighting on so many other different fronts inside the United States to carry this struggle forward. And I probably missed, what was the critical point that he was asking about, that was being asked?
How we should operate within this presidential.
So what we have to do is that we just have to, have a clear independence, like within the party, has played a major role in building the Black Inspired Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations to win as many different African organizations as possible into a collective political and trajectory, strategic trajectory. And there are 15 different organizations that participate in this. And one of the most important things we're doing is on November 6th through the 8th, and particularly the 7th and the 8th, we are having a national mobilization. We call on African people from everywhere to come into Washington, D.C. We're gonna rock it. After all of the colonial virus quarantines, after all of the police murder, after all the lies and treachery by Biden and by Angela Davis and by Trump and the rest of them, we're calling on the workers to come out with our own banners, demanding the freedom from political prisoners, demanding the Black community control of the police, demanding the solidarity with other oppressed peoples around the world. We want Mexicans, Filipinos, everybody to unite with the struggle of African people. And we want whatever the white nationalist leftists to be able to unite with the struggle of African people against colonialism. And we want to mobilize the people. And the thing is, I'm saying it this way because that's what we have to do. We have to wage independent struggle against colonialism. And we can't make the mistake of thinking that somehow you're getting over on the system because you're going to support this Democrat versus this Trump or this something to that effect, because it doesn't matter who wins that election. The fact is, we know who wins the election. The capitalists are going to win the election. The colonialists are going to win the damn election. So what position are we going to be in with this? We have to forge our own narrative, our own agenda that serves to mobilize African people everywhere. So I don't care who votes for a Democrat. I don't care who votes for a Republican. The main thing is that Africans need to know that this is our general position in terms of where we have to go. So what the coalition has done is create a national Black political agenda for self-determination. And this is what we stand for. This is what we go. This is what we should try to implement. That's what we're calling on people to do. So that's going to be 3 days after the election, 3 days after capitalism wins, the colonial capitalists win the election in Washington, D.C. Thousands of African people need to come there for our own rally at Malcolm X Park, our own march on the White House, and the rally across the street from the White House at Lafayette Park, and on the following day for our own conference where we shall discuss how we pursue this struggle for power, utilizing the national Black political agenda for self-determination.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you for that. And all right, so now we're going to move right into the next question as we wind down the time. We have Agbe Rabe on Facebook from Frankfurt, Germany asks, thank you, Chairman. In what way could or would you explain that Zionism has played a major role or has been on the front line of the oppression of Black, brown, and red indigenous people globally and in Europe and the corporations called USA?
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing about Zionism, I want us to remember, however, that Zionism is one of the instruments of imperialist aggression against the African and other oppressed peoples around the world. What has occurred is that now we have come to understand that after all of the murder of indigenous people in the Americas, after all of the murder of African people on the continent of Africa and throughout the Americas as well, after all the assault that's been made on the people in the Middle East by Europe, borders that's been defined by France and England throughout the so-called Middle East, after all of the starvation that's been imposed on Black people and other peoples around the world, despite the fact that the majority of people living on the planet Earth do not have clean water, do not have electricity, do not have access to decent housing and what have you. The worst crime in the world is not that crime that was created by white power, white people, Europe against the rest of us that created the capitalist system itself. The greatest crime in the world is the crime that was committed by white people against white people, and now it has where we see the emergence of a concept, a term that didn't exist before, called genocide, that was created by white men to describe what happened to white people, adopted by the United Nations, but there is no convention against colonialism as such, no shame in being a colonizer, so you can even talk about what happened to African people, so that you have this lie where Europeans who left Europe and went to Palestine stole their land and what have you, and they say they did it because of the offenses that were made against European Jews, and European Jews did catch hell. They have for a long time in Europe, but there was a time where European Jews were just Germans, when the Germans was killing us in Southwest Africa, and other times, you know, so now you can't even make a fundamental criticism of the social system, because against the worst crime was created by white people against white people, etc. So it serves as a kind of cover for imperialism, philosophically, politically, for imperialism, because you can't even get to the oppression of other peoples around the world without having to cross over this barrier that has been established by the so-called Holocaust. So if killing 6 million Jews was the worst crime in humanity, what was killing 10 to 12 million Africans by Leopold alone, by Belgium alone? What was killing all the Africans who died in the process of being brought into captivity, or the indigenous peoples in the Americas and other places around the world. What the hell are we if the worst crime in humanity against humanity was created by the so-called Holocaust? And then in Europe, they make laws so that if you deny or criticize that or say that it didn't happen, they put you in jail or they can ostracize you and things like that. It's a protected concept, and it's a protected concept that makes it difficult for people to identify the oppression of Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world for what it really is, as the foundation of the whole rotten social system, including that part of the social system that is occupied by those white people in occupied Palestine who have stolen their land, occupied their territory. So, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. All right, so we're probably gonna be able to take like 2 more questions.
Not 2.
Not 2, just 1? Okay,
Yeah.
I hear you, okay.
Yeah, I have to, yeah.
Yes, so we'll take this last question, and for those whose questions were not answered today, well, I'll let you know what you can do following. So, all right, last question comes from Don Diallo on Facebook, says, how can the power be taken or retasked back to the African people from the African elites that is tied to the apron strings of the colonial powers?
The African elite, they got to go down. I mean, there's no way. We're going to have to, those elite forces who have been placed there exactly for the purpose of that. And that's why, there's such a problem with what's called Pan-Africanism in many instances, because much of it cannot even identify the class contradiction that exists within African society itself, internationally. So somehow, because somebody is Black and they occupy some kind of position on the continent of Africa, you have to sort of respect the existence of that entity. That's nonsense. Those guys got to go. And they protect the social system and the borders that the white power has created that separate Africans from ourselves, from each other and our resources. These entities function as incubators for the reproduction of the African petty bourgeoisie neo-colonial forces. They are incubators. That's where they reproduce themselves. That's why they will never destroy those borders. The working people have to destroy those borders. The most democratic revolutionary national forces on the continent of Africa and elsewhere are going to have to tear these borders down because it's only we who have a stake in destroying those borders, not those petty bourgeois so-called elite. How are you going to have an elite Negro? You got a situation where they don't build hospitals. They don't build hospitals. They don't have to have a hospital because when they get sick, they hop on an airplane and fly to France, or they hop on an airplane and go to Saudi Arabia, or they on an airplane and go to some other place where the mass of the people can't find a hospital or a doctor in the closest village in the community that they live in. So the elite have to be brought down in the process of destroying our oppression and exploitation of our Africa. We have to actually liberate all of Africa, unite all of Africa and African people on the continent and globally. So next Sunday, we want to do a lot of this as well. We want to have a large sector of this to ask the chairman, so we can talk about various questions in addition to this important study that we're doing on the question of the nation. This is a fundamentally important question. And what we're doing is taking political education, taking revolutionary theory, philosophy, et cetera, out of these ivory towers and bringing it down to our people where it's absolutely necessary, important. We can have an informed revolutionary African working class population. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman. And that's going to just about do it, close us out. And I appreciate you mentioning that, if your question was not answered here, that you do have an opportunity to get it asked, to have it seen and answered live by the chairman. So if you take your questions, I also have your questions that you've asked today, and that can be posed next week in another hour-long session of Ask the Chairman as a part of the Omali Taught Me Sunday study. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and I just want you to know that this study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, winning the war of ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningsphere.com and join us for the entire entire month as we celebrate Black August, a month of African resistance. During Black August, the Burning Spear newspaper conducts an annual fundraiser to keep the spear burning. The revolutionary Black Power print and online journal in constant production since 1968. Help us reach our fundraising goal by donating at theburningspear.com/Black-August. Contribute to the Mafundi Lake Sponsor a Prisoner Fund, where we ship to over 500 prisoners for free. Participate in our August Spear Sales competition and win some one-of-a-kind collector's items. And tune in August 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern for a virtual cultural event, Africa Speaks for Itself, a night of poetry and storytelling, with African cultural workers across the world celebrating 100 years since the adoption of the red, black, and green flag. And that event will also feature our very own chairman, Amalia Shatella.
And I think,
For Revolutionary Radio, dynamic shows and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. If you united with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party, visit apspuhuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply, no matter where it is you are located in the world. If you're an African and you're ready for the African Revolution, join the party. Order your copy of Chairman Amalia Shatella's latest books, Vanguard-The Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution and An Uneasy Equilibrium, at burningspearmarketplace.com. Right after this study, head over to the Black is Back Coalition's Facebook page to attend the second day of the 11th annual conference themed Fight for Black Power, Free All Political Prisoners. That starts at 10 a.m. So right after this, just jump onto Black is Back Coalition's Facebook page. And just a couple more announcements. The Black Power Blueprint has a new weekly talk show every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, called The Struggle to Achieve Black Power. This is a dynamic political education series hosted by the Black Power Blueprint's own outreach coordinator, Abdullah Alexander. Like and follow the Black Power Blueprint on Facebook and turn on notifications for live videos so you will be notified when the show goes live. Also, text PB to 95328 for text notifications of Black Power Blueprint live streams and special events. We are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to COVID-19. APDEP has recently launched an international telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Onc. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. Uhuru Furniture stores in Oakland and Philadelphia go live on Facebook every week to highlight beautiful new pieces and build African economic self-determination. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Philly. And in Oakland, California, tune in every Wednesday and Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Oak. One of the last announcements I wanted to say was that Chairman Amalia Shatella also goes live on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern from the Chairman Amalia Shatella Facebook and Burning Spear TV YouTube page, with an address to the African nation regarding, relevant, today topics that the chairman provides an African internationalist analysis of. So that's another opportunity to have political education with the chairman at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays from his Facebook page. Lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit the burningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Amalia Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.